Something to that. We can't ignore the disparities between the outcomes for white kids and the outcomes for black kids. And I think when we have this conversation, we talk about it from the perspective of rehabilitation. We talk about it from the perspective of what we can do to stop these kids. Well, there's no more bad behaved black kids as there are bad behaved white kids. And so what we have to ask ourselves is, why are white kids getting treatment and black kids getting prosecution? And if we don't draw a stark line to understand that difference, we'll continue to have this conversation, which I might add is the same conversation my parents had, is the same conversation my grandparents had, and generations before us have had to have. And so when we get serious and make sure that we do not exclude race from these conversations, which is one of the biggest factors in relation to outcomes, it's race. And it's a big factor of the United States, race. Let's say it one more time, y'all, race. And we can't get away from it.
Right.
Simeon, that's a good point. I know when I was representing juveniles, when I was practicing, I represented way more white and brown students from being tribunal, from schools, expelled, suspended, and then they had to come over to juvenile court and deal with the criminal matter. I dealt with representing those disadvantaged black and brown students way more than I did the white students. And that's a good question. We have to ask ourselves, why is this way much more punitive for a black person or a brown person? It's going to have much more harsher effects on them. Oftentimes they're coming from one parent household where the mom or the dad is working and they're trying to support other people. So if you send this child off to a detention center, there goes his education. There goes his, life from getting employment. So it has a rippling effect. So we do need to make sure that we take a look and be careful when it comes to disadvantaged, lower income, black and brown young people. That's an excellent point, because the things that they're doing are the same things that non-white students are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So can I address historically? So if I can suggest everybody go online and watch Slavery by Another Name. It is very important for us to understand the historical context of black bodies in this country. Our bodies were not brought here to sit on the beaches. Our bodies were brought here to be enslaved. And so as enslaved people, we did not have any rights to our own bodies. And that continued up until probably the 60s, because when you do Jim Crow and someone can tell you where and how to move around, that's still complete control. And so because we didn't have control of our bodies, and Slavery by Another Name, what happened after slavery ended was a rebranding mostly of black man as him being a more dangerous species of human. And in that context, black men took on a lesser value for his bodies. And of course, being in the black body is always looked at as something to be feared. And that was not the circumstances when they were on plantation. They were valued as property, and when they did the work, it was all good. But the minute it was over, and when the slave masters could no longer tell a black person what to do, they rebrand them and basically enslave them another way. They basically jailed them. And so we started that prison pipeline for black human beings.
And when we speak of even like prison pipeline, we're talking about entire communities that are propped up from the money of incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
Entire communities are making money from incarceration. When you go somewhere and you find this prison in upstate New York, or you find this prison in the middle of Missouri, in an area where there aren't many black people,
Mm-hmm.
they're getting congressional seats because of that prison. They are helping their population and census numbers. They're getting additional resources. They're employing deputies to monitor the people in jail. They're employing police to arrest them. They're employing clerks. They're employing food vendors to bring food into the jail. They're employing people for sheets and napkins. They're employing people for every single aspect of things. And I suppose that black subjugation is a white jobs program. And what you'll find is that as you put more black people in jail, as you deny more of these access, as you charge higher interest rates for black people, as you do those things, everyone else gets the fruit of it. And that's the basis of America. Representative McLeod, you brought up something in terms of male bodies in slavery. It's important to understand that this entire economy was built off of the bodies of black folks. Entire economy. If you look at during slavery, a male slave who was trained had the same value as a single family home. So when you understand that the stock market was created off of black bodies, when you understand that policing was created to control black bodies, when you understand that legislation was created to subjugate black bodies, you understand that black folks are the fuel that America runs on.
I just want to have an undergird real quick, Simeon, on that point, because I don't want to get lost. That was great. In addition, when you were talking about CCC, which is one of the organizations that makes a ton of money off of incarcerating black and brown bodies, they actually are one of the highest stock companies in the world. So I say that to say, because we talk about action steps, look at your retirement, look at where your parents are putting their retirement. So as you begin to get older and professional, these are some small action steps you can take by asking a company like Liberty Mutual, do you invest with CCC? Because CCC is making money off of this issue that Simeon is just talking about. So that's just a minor step that you can take when we have this overall discussion.
So let me say something legislatively. In our budget, there was 150 million, it ended up going down to $127 million that taxpayer paid to private prisons in our state of Georgia. And I just want people to understand that we actually are paying for people to be incarcerated with our tax dollars. 75% of our budget in the state of Georgia comes directly from taxpayers, income tax and sales tax. 19% comes from fees that we pay in the state, and the other 6% comes from businesses. So the bulk of the taxes is being paid in this, which $28 billion, we were around $27 billion for the state of Georgia is being paid by us. And to know that taxpayer dollars being paid to private prison is completely unacceptable to me.
That's right.
And can I go ahead and say, since we're talking about prison, black people make up more than 60% of the prison population in the state of Georgia. In other Georgia counties, the volume of black men sent to prison declined by 19%, except for Gwinnett County. Here it seems to have increased by 7%. Can you explain why Gwinnett County has such a high rate of imprisoning black men, and what can be done to reduce this number?
So the first change is obvious in Gwinnett County. But again, our black bodies is very evident, right? We stick out. It's not like we can say, oh, today I'm not going to be black. It is what it is. But because there is a fundamental revenue source to it, it makes it easier for black bodies to be put and be incarcerated. And in Gwinnett County, obviously with the population changing and being a county now for majority of people of color, that is also a factor. But I think being conscious and having people elected and sitting at the table, because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think it's important that once we start electing people, we can hold people accountable. But if you don't have that feeling or that ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, you will never get there. Empathy is not something that's easy for everyone, right? Sympathy is real easy. If you bumped your toe and I bumped my toe, I can say, oh gosh, I know how that feels. But if you had cancer and I didn't have cancer, I might not feel the way you do. But I surely know empathetically how it must make you feel. And so as black bodies walk around Gwinnett County, they tend to be a target. And there is revenue that is derived from black bodies being incarcerated.
So can you talk more about that accountability system? Because I think you mentioned about a database and entering police officers who are offenders of discrimination. Can you talk more about that bill that is in the process?
So the whole idea is if an officer has had gone out on a call and he's used excessive force, we want that data. We want that to be put into a database. And each time that officer does something, then we can at least start to see what is the pattern, which is threat. Is this person capable of doing the job? Does this person need retraining? Did they get enough training? So that's the whole point of this, is to actually hold officers who basically work for you, by the way. All elected officials work for you, so don't be afraid of us. We work for you, you elect us. When we stepped to the plate to run for office, that's what we did. We said we were willing to work in service of people and be their voice when they're not available for that purpose. But I also encourage you to make sure you keep us accountable as well. So call and write. But yes, just like officers, they do work for us. The salaries are paid by taxpayers. So actually, when a law enforcement person beats up on a citizen, he's actually beating his employer, because we pay the taxes that pays their salary. And I absolutely respect law enforcement. I think it's important because there are people that will not do things right. But we also have to make sure we have a law enforcement that is actually, don't come into this venue as biased, as with racial intention, with no diversity training, especially in Gwinnett County. You've got to have diversity training. I remember, I think it was maybe about 4 years ago now, when this young man was beaten in Gwinnett County. Now, the district attorney did move quickly to remove the police officer, but I later heard that the police officer basically didn't get really much discipline about it. And those are the kind of things that we need to put in the database so he doesn't go to another county,
Right.
another state,
Mm-hmm.
and with that kind of thing, his record needs to follow him as well, or her.
And this accountability system is only for excessive force, or it includes discrimination?
All of it, so the whole pattern of behavior, right? Because usually the discrimination leads into the excessive.
Yes.
And let me just say, when I hear of statistics or data that disproportionately shows a higher number of one race being incarcerated or detained, there are a combination of reasons that come to my mind. Number one, racial profiling is number one. Another factor is not having access to bail or bonds. Because if you're racially profiled, if you're arrested and you're charged, you're gonna go to jail. If you don't have access to bond out or bail out, you're gonna stay in jail until your trial. That adds to the number of people in jail. Also, not having access to legal counsel. Okay, because if you have an attorney, they can file motions or whatever, ask for a bond to be reduced, or ask for you to get out. So not having access to that adds to people being in jail. Also, people who are out walking around on probation, commit a new offense, okay? If it's a violent offense, then you're gonna go back to jail. That adds to the number of people in jail. Also, not having alternative access to social resources. Say if you're on drugs or you have a mental illness, you'd be better served perhaps in a facility versus being in jail. So that adds to the number of people in jail. Unfortunately, all these factors that I've just mentioned affects minorities and lower income people more than they do other people who are not in that situation. So with the combination of what Representative McLeod said and those factors, that adds up the numbers, you know?
And it's stark, it's quite interesting because I don't believe the continent of Africa has as many blacks in jail as the United States of America.
Absolutely. You know, there are more black men in jail in the United States than there are women in jail around the entire world combined. And so when you understand stats like that, you know that this isn't from people who are just devious. These people are being targeted. We are being targeted.
That's right.
I have been targeted.
Mm-hmm.
And so really understanding the cause of this is race. The cause of this is what chattel slavery did to the conscience and the economy of America. And until we address those things, we will continue to see these problems. When I've talked about issues I've had with the police, my dad was able to say, yeah, I had that same issue. His dad was able to say, yeah, I had that same issue, and they run across too. And so we have to be willing to have that tough conversation. We have to be willing to every time you say the word training, it should also say accountability. We talk about throwing money at this issue. Oh, let's train these police. Well, they do real good with white folks. They're well trained with white folks.
Come on now.
They can de-escalate. They can do all of these great things. Our previous panelist was talking about how the radar gun it can't tell if you're black or white. Well, that police officer sure can when they pull you over.
Mm-hmm.
You know how many times I've matched the description, or how many times I've been suspected of, hey, well, I have reasonable suspicion. If I get pulled over, my car always gets searched. If I get pulled over, I always get put in handcuffs. Always. I'm a 42-year-old man. This has happened to me in almost every state that I've frequented and almost every city that I've been in. Where if I'm pulled over, I've never been arrested. None of those things. But I've been in handcuffs. I've been on the hood of a car. I've been behind the car. I've had the dogs rifle through my car. I've had my car searched. I've had all of my luggage pulled out and all of my clothes pulled out on the side of the road while people are driving by rubbernecking. No one's stopping, by the way. People are driving by rubbernecking. So if we don't address this, we will continue down this path. And if we don't address the legacy of slavery, the legacy of the slave codes, the legacy of the slave catchers, we will continue in the cycle.
And Mr. Harris, you gave
That's
some
right.
really good examples of things that are happening that are unfair. And you gave some examples of factors that are leading to this unfair incarceration of Black and brown people. So what steps is the judicial taken in Gwinnett County taking to reduce the unfair incarceration of Black and brown students and stop the racial bias in decisions to lock minorities from economically disadvantaged communities?
Number one, making sure that the defendant has access to counsel, legal counsel, when they come to court. You need to understand your rights. Everybody who comes to court deserves to have their constitutional rights preserved. We can appoint counsel to represent them. Also, I don't deal a lot with bails and bonds, but also having a bond that's affordable, that the person can afford to bond out on while they're maintaining their innocence. You're entitled to plead not guilty. You're not guilty to proven innocence. Also, accountability court. There are some charges, some people who may be sentenced, jail time may be involved or requested by the prosecutor. I can waive that. I can suspend the jail time. Also, if the fines are so restrictive that they're financially unduly burdening you, I can substitute the fine or convert the fine to community service, okay? Now, I have had people to come to court, young people, who I suspended and waived all of the conditions of their probation. All I said was, young man, young lady, you go to school, get your GED, or go to school, get your high school diploma.
That's what's up.
Now, if they don't do that, I've had them come back and not do it. If they don't do that, then you tied my hands. But when you have a judge who's willing to take your particular situation and look at it and try to help you, because that's what we want all judges to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from the South. I'm from Alabama.
Yeah.
And I've experienced racism. I've experienced, and let me tell you, it don't feel good. So to be treated that way and have to come to court and stand before a judge and have that feeling that I'm not being listened to, or no matter what I do or say, then they're going to rule against me, is not a good feeling. And that's a feeling that you're not going to feel when you come into my courtroom, and it shouldn't be a feeling that you feel when you come into any judge's courtroom, because we're supposed to be fair and unbiased. We have to take that person, look at that person, and judge them based on their particular circumstances and situation. Take race out of it. Race should not be a part of it. And so that's what I do as a judge. Now, I'm only one judge, but if I see it, I have a duty, I think, to acknowledge it and call it out and hold that other person responsible. That's what we're going to have to do. This is something that I can't do it, Representative Cloud can't do it, Simeon can't. We've got to hold our neighbors responsible, and we've got to keep calling them out on it.
As the judge was speaking as well, and I couldn't help but think about this,
the importance of seeing a judge that looks like me.
First African-American judge in
I was just about to say, I was very honored to work with her, the judicial branch. As a person who became a citizen of this country, I actually read the Constitution and realized the importance of the judicial branch. It's the most difficult branch to really communicate to people about. And so it gets kind of been shoved down the bottom of the spectrum and people don't pay attention to it. But having good judges on the bench is necessary. It's necessary. And I am so proud of Judge Larry. She has made us proud as a judge, period, not just a black judge, as a judge, period. And I'm so honored. So we are going to continue to make sure that we get good people on the bench, good people in the legislative branch, and good people in the executive branch.
Right, and I was gonna just speak to that piece even more so, that when we're looking at that experience, how did she get there, right? What law school did she attend? How did she get over the barriers? Because there are racial barriers and gender barriers when it comes to getting into law. I went to law school as well, and also getting into medicine. So a lot of times you can't be what you can't see. Or you don't find the comfort, or you're not really getting justice because you walk into a room that you feel like this person doesn't look like me, they're not gonna understand my story. They're just not. And that's the same for medicine. So I think a piece of justice is making sure that we take a step back and ask, how did she get to this seat? Because I would love to see more of you on the court. I would love to see more of all colors on the court, because the reality is, and I think we have to sit in this too, is that we do identify with things that we see. We would love to be unified. We would love to have humanity, and we talked about this in the green room, but until we get to equity, we can't get to unity.
And I think people need to understand the difference between equality and equity. So equality is all of us get a size 8 shoes, like equal, everybody's got 8. But equity is giving you the size you actually can wear. That is equity. As an elected official, and when I try my best, once you're elected, to really serve, right? I am an elected Democrat, but when I became an elected official, I served the entire district. I don't care what party they belong to, if they voted for me or not. The needs of people is my job, is to make sure that when they come to me and they need something, and if I can, I make it happen. That's my first responsibility as an elected official. I took an oath to that, and that is my primary responsibility once I'm elected. Politics is about persuasion. When you're running for office, you persuade people to vote for you. But once you're elected, you do the job of the people, for the people, by the people, and of the people.
Right, and we would all say that you guys are all doing amazing jobs as elected officials. Especially you, Gwinnett County is really blessed to have you judge. Now, are there specific steps that Gwinnett County is doing to make sure that it's more fair when it comes to incarceration?
I think, as I was saying before, that's an individual judge's a decision. Listen, we're all human. We all have implicit biases. There are things that I may not like. There are things that you may not like. Sometimes it's consciously done. Sometimes it's unconsciously. I think that it's going to be an internal decision that I have to first realize that there is racism. There is systemic racism. I have to realize that. I can't hide behind the bush and say, there's no racism. Once I realize that there is racism, and it's still running rampant, I have to make sure that when I'm up there sitting on that bench judging a case, that I have to make sure that I'm as fair and I'm as unbiased and I just see nothing but the facts of the case, okay? Now I come with a perspective, I'm African American, I come with that perspective and I think it serves me well, okay? It affords me to be fair and have justice when I'm rendering my decisions. But when I see something that's not fair, or something that someone else has said that's not proper, then I think it's incumbent upon me to call it out and make it known that that's not fair. Like I said, we all have to take ownership. We've got to take ownership. I think that's the first step. I don't see, does anybody else see any other way that we do it or change it? It's got to start within.
I think as the voter, you advocate for what you're looking for. You look at recalling positions when people aren't doing what they're supposed to do. You We talk about voting and we talk about it by itself, but voting without advocacy is a waste. And advocacy without accountability is a bigger waste. So if you start by voting and stop at voting, your vote doesn't count, it's just counting. And so I think that big difference is, what are you advocating for? Are you having those conversations? And what are you holding people accountable to? Hey, when you were running, you said this. When you were doing this, you said this. When are you going to fulfill that promise to us as your constituents? And that's the role that we have to all take as individuals, as well as with whatever organizations you're in. The other is, as Black folks, we have to be willing to speak the truth.
Come on now.
We have to be willing to say what it is when it's happening. We have to be willing to stand up. I had someone tell me, hey, why do you play the race card? I said, why did you deal the debt?
Mm-hmm.
It's the card I got. And it's the card that you keep giving. It's the card that you keep pushing in my face. So I'm laying it down. I'm going to lay down that damn ace of spades.
That's right.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it is. I'm going to lay that down because that's what's happening. And so when you see those racial disparities, it's important that we call them out. It's important that we put them in context of history. And it's important that we hold the people accountable who are doing it. I decided there's people online that I ask to resign every day. Every single day. Every single day I'm online, #resign, and put the name behind it. Because at the end of the day, they are accountable to me. I'm the voter. I'm the citizen. They are accountable to you. You are what makes all of this run. And if you're not involved, if you don't know who your judges are, if you don't know who your state representative is, if you don't know who your commissioner is, how can you make a change? You're just yelling for nothing.
Now, to add to that, actually, can I just add, when the Black Lives Matter movement started, one of the things, you have to explain to people that Black Lives Matter too, if you didn't know. So the thing that was interesting for me was, I talked to several young people and I said, walking to walk or walking to just move someplace is not getting anything done. You need to make a demand. You need to say what you want from what you're doing. The most important thing that the civil rights movement did was actually accumulated in two wonderful acts: the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. They didn't just walk the walk. They didn't get off the bus for 381 days just to get off the walk to work and where they needed to go. They got off because they had a reason and a purpose. And in the end, the only thing that matters is the law.
Absolutely. And there were 6 days of riots. Let's not forget that there were 6 days of riots before that legislation was passed. So Martin Luther King said that rioting is the voice of the unheard. So do not engage in conversations about your reaction. Only focus on what you were trying to accomplish in your acts. And I'm not an advocate of riot. I'm not an advocate of racism either. And so until we fix that harm, I'm not going to say something to someone who's mad, to someone who's yelling. I'm going to try to direct them in a good way. But at the same time, their yelling is because you haven't listened. Their yelling is because their politicians haven't cared about them enough to actually say, this is what we can do to help. So brothers yell, sisters yell, sisters scream, brothers scream, get mad and advocate. Get mad and put that heat in the letter. Get mad and put that heat in the email. Get mad and berate them online. If you haven't written your congressperson, start today. If you haven't written your senator, start today. If you haven't called up there and just raised a little bit of cane just for Monday, do it today.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I must say, young people, I think young people are really taking a stand, and young people are standing up and having your voice heard. Because as Simeon said, and you deserve an applause. As Simeon said, our parents have been going through this, and our grandparents, but now in this day and age, it seems to me that the young people are standing up and having their voice heard. they're saying we're not going to take it. So I applaud you for that.
So since we only have 15 more minutes, I want to go ahead and take a virtual question. So since we were just talking about advocacy, the question is talking about how have you guys, in your respective roles, help level the playing field and help create a more equitable society for Black and Brown residents outside of your positions? Or within, either way. If you need to see it as well.
Well, I can answer that. Before I became elected, I've always been activated. I started a nonprofit called Can I Community Action Network Initiative that register people to vote. Before coming here, I used to come in this chamber to protest a commissioner who called Congressman Lewis a racist pig. So for me, part of my life is always to be about activating. It is important to always activate. It's always to advocate, because you don't get anything done if you don't have a purpose, right? You gotta have a purpose. Life is about a purpose and where you go. And I think it's important for anyone that's in this room, you don't have to be an elected official to get something done. Before I was an elected official, I was doing something. And I will continue being somebody after this is all over, and I will continue being who I am and standing up for what I think is right. And anytime you are born in this world, you are important. Your value is from the minute you take air, you are a valued human being and should be treated as such, and you should always take care to make sure that your voice is heard. Even if you're not the most outspoken person, there's other ways to do things. You can show up and help somebody and help something get done. So for me, it's been part of my DNA, to say the least. I've always stood up for what I thought was right, and I will continue to do that till the day I die.
And I agree, just being a part, before I was elected, I was out in my community. I volunteered, I gave back. I'm huge on youth. I love youth development. I love seeing our next generation. One of my daughters, 17-year-old, she's here. I have 2 daughters. It's just important to be a part, be an integral part of the community. You don't have to be anything special, just volunteer. Do something, and I'll do that when I'm not even in this role, because that's just who I am. Listen, this is our community. We make up this community. So we're gonna either make it a better community, or it's gonna be a bad community. And I wanna live in a great community with great people. I want my young people to be my future leaders. I want y'all to be better than what we are. That's what our peers want. So in order to do that, I have to set an example. I have to show you what I mean. So that means being out there amongst the community, giving back, volunteering my time. So that's how I contribute.
I would say for me, it's that I wave the equity flag and access. Access, access, access. Again, I know I keep saying this, but you can't be what you can't see. And so I think it's important, even where you are, if you were the first SGA president at Peachtree Ridge as an African-American female, mentor someone else that looks like you to go into that space. I know it was hard. You don't even have to talk to me about it. I'm sure you had all types of daggers and complaints and all kind of stuff going on, but don't give up. Don't give up. Go back and mentor that person so that they can sit in the seat. I sit every day in medical school right now on tables or in discussions with people who do not look like me, who may not even know what an HBCU is. And then once they learn what that is, they don't credit it as the same. I literally have those discussions in 2020. So it's real. So I think it's very important that if you are in a space where you have access or you have a voice, utilize that voice and also reach back once you get there. Because continuously, just like I'm having this experience now, I'm overjoyed that I see a Black judge right here. At my age of 40, right? So that says how important this is. The work that you do every day, make sure that if you're in that space, that you reach back and that you speak up wherever you are.
I can't say enough about that. Speaking up wherever you are. Also advocating, finding an organization where you can multiply your advocacy. It's one thing to go at it alone. It's, when 2 agree, we know what's up there. It's one thing to go at it alone, but having someone else to walk with you in that advocacy can make a difference. I joined the Gwinnett NAACP out of frustration. out of what I thought wasn't getting done. And I was like, hey, I can't be frustrated if I'm not there. I need to be there. And put yourself in the position to advocate. The other part of it is, and I mentioned it earlier, being truthful. Being truthful. We know that the average black family is worth way less than the average white family, and we know why. We know that black folks aren't treated the same way in almost every level of government in every municipality across the country, and we know why. So it is imperative for you to not be silent about it. It is imperative for you to not allow someone to shut you up when speaking that truth. When John Lewis and Martin Luther King were preaching nonviolence, that was nonviolence in the face of truth. Nonviolence doesn't mean anything if you're not telling the truth. The fact that they were telling the truth, putting their story out there, and that people were being violent with them over the truth, over wanting to keep them subjugated. So truth is your friend. And in that truth, we will find the keys to releasing ourselves from this subjugation that has persisted for over 400 years in this country. And you cannot separate it, and don't allow anyone else to separate. My great-great-grandfather was a slave in Georgia. My parents were born during Jim Crow. My grandparents had the Klan burn a house of theirs. Don't let these stories go to the side. The reason why race is uncomfortable is because they've done some uncomfortable things. And it should be an uncomfortable conversation. So you sit in that uncomfort, and you look them right in the eye, and you let them know. We're coming for what's ours.
In our society, we do a lot of responding as needed. If something bad happens, and respond. But it's really good if we can prevent, because prevention is key. So one of our virtual viewers asked, is the system preparing for radical change to end systematic racism in the criminal justice system? Perhaps, Judge, you want to answer that?
I think that's a good legislature. Because they create the laws, they make the laws.
So it is a review office. You cannot, obviously can't legislate love or decency.